What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top waiver wire targets heading into week 2 of the fantasy football season. So post week 1 is always a great time to hit the waiver wire. We don't know exactly what's going on with these offenses. After week 1, we have a much better idea. What are the splits going to look like at the running back position? How are some of these younger wide receivers working their way into their offenses? What's the tight end position looking like? Are there full-time guys? Are there tight ends and committees? So I think we had a lot of questions answered here in week 1. So it's a great time to hit the waiver wire and improve your fantasy football team. I'm going to be talking about every single position. So running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, also some defenses that you guys can be looking to stream. And these are going to be players that are available in 60% or more leagues using the ESPN Fantasy Football Waiver Wire. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. Any fantasy questions, drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. But let's just dive right into the running back position. And I think there are a lot of quality ads this week. I want to start off by talking about Tank Bigsby. He's rostered in 4.6 leagues, and Tank played a real role in this game. I think heading into the season, myself and a lot of other people out there thought he was just a pure handcuff. He was definitely getting better reports than he was throughout last year, but it still seemed like he'd be pretty firmly behind Travis Etienne. Tank Bigsby, in a competitive game script, actually matched Travis Etienne's 12 carries. He rushed for 73 yards on those 12 attempts compared to Travis Etienne's 44. Now, obviously, he still has that clear-cut handcuff upside. That's obviously still there. But I think if he continues playing this well, and the fact that he already had a 50-50 carry split in week 1, it tells me that he could become playable in plus matchups moving forward. Now, the next running back, and I think someone who has a much better shot of just earning a legit weekly role regardless of injury, would be Rico Dowdle. He's been someone that I've been in on, pretty much throughout this entire offseason, and I wouldn't say I was like overblown with his usage in week 1. I would have preferred if he was the clear lead back to start off the season, but he barely makes the cut here, rostered in 39.8% of leagues. I think Zeke is definitely going to get a lot of the attention after week 1 because he was the guy that got into the end zone. It looked like he had a much better fantasy day, but this was still a very, very competitive split between Zeke and Dowdle. You had 32 snaps for Zeke, 28 for Dowdle. Zeke ran 12 routes. Dowdle ran 11. Zeke had 12 opportunities. Dowdle had 9. So close to 50-50. The only main difference was that Zeke got the goal line carry, which obviously led to the touchdown. So right now, I would consider Rico Dowdle as like the 1B of this committee. Definitely someone who should be rostered. Neither guy had an amazing day efficiency-wise, but it was a tough matchup against a very, very good Cleveland Browns defense. So I think moving forward, there are specific games where maybe both these guys are playable, but a running back in a 50-50 split on this Cowboys offense should definitely be rostered in over 40% of leagues. Now, the next guy is going to be Bucky Irving, another dude who I've been pretty high on. One of my favorite later round dart throws at the running back position. He's rostered in 20.9% of leagues, and he looked very, very good in his NFL debut. 9 carries, 62 yards. He actually got double what Rachaad White got on the ground in 15 carries. So Rachaad White was 15 for 31. Bucky Irving was 9 for 62. Also involved as a pass catcher, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 14 yards. We already, had kind of understood that he was the clear-cut handcuff. That was already there. But I still think he has real upside to push for a committee here. Rachaad White, I know it's only week 1, but year 1, year 2, a very inefficient option on the ground. Bucky Irving comes in, already looks good in week 1. We know he can catch passes. He's a fairly well-rounded back. And even though he is flawed as a prospect, right, he's undersized, he's not overly athletic. If he's going to come out and produce like this in week 1, he's definitely someone who should be rostered and could be pushing some sort of committee as we move on throughout the season. After Bucky Irving, we have Alexander Mattison here, who's rostered in 10.3% of leagues. He actually outsnapped Zamir White 36-23. He ran 24 routes to Zamir White's 10. He was targeted 6 times, caught 4 of them for 43 yards and a touchdown. And I will say, if I was someone who drafted Zamir White, I'd be a little bit concerned here. Obviously, this wasn't like 3-down workhorse Zamir White. And the concerning part here is that I do think like Madison, outsnapping Zamir White was definitely due to the game script. But based on how the Raiders looked in week 1, that's probably going to be a game script they're seeing a fair amount, right? Like they're going to be trailing in most games. And if that's just going to completely shift, the usage to Madison, I definitely think that's concerning for Zamir White. I feel like Madison's definitely rosterable. Maybe if you're super desperate in a game where you know they're going to be trailing, getting blown out, you can throw him in there because you know he's going to be involved as a pass catcher. But I think he's also just someone who has handcuff upside. Where if Zamir White goes down, he's still going to handle those like third down situations, but maybe he could also work his way in to some of the early down work. So probably more of a handcuff, but also someone who's like a better desperate play than just a pure handcuff. A guy who would be a pure handcuff here is Ray Davis, who is rostered in 14.3% of leagues. He saw a few opportunities in week one, made a couple plays, had a 13-yard run, a 14-yard reception. You do have Ty Johnson still kind of working in there, but I do think Ray Davis is the more valuable James Cook handcuff. Then continuing on with some of these handcuff options, we have Jordan Mason. Niners obviously played tonight, but Mason's rostered in 23.8% of leagues. He is the Christian McCaffrey handcuff. Then we have Marshawn Lloyd, who actually missed week one, rostered in 22.5% of leagues. He's the Josh Jacobs handcuff, but I also think he has some upside to work his way into a committee. Josh Jacobs was looking rough early on in that game, the Friday night game. He ended up picking it up. He ripped off some bigger runs, so I'm not as concerned about Jacobs moving forward, but I do think LaFleur in the past has liked to use a committee. Marshawn Lloyd, day 3 pick, interesting player, someone who could, get some work even if Josh Jacobs does stay healthy. Then we have someone from the Thursday night game, Justice Hill, rostered in 3.3% of leagues. And we actually saw the game script leading to Justice Hill out-snapping Derrick Henry. I'm guessing there are some people who have some concerns with Derrick Henry. Personally, I was pretty out on Henry heading into the season. That was a factor that he's not going to be super involved as a pass catcher, can kind of get phased out of games. But even as someone who wasn't in on Henry, I'm not concerned. The Ravens aren't going to be trailing many games. I don't think Justice Hill is playable if Derrick Henry is healthy, but he's still a decent handcuff, for a kind of aging Derrick Henry. Then a couple more guys here. Braylon Allen, rostered in 7.7% of leagues. He is the Breece Hall handcuff. And then I want to talk about Jalen Wright here because he's rostered in 22.5% of leagues, but he was a healthy and active in week one. And I think some people, based on him not even being active for the game, they might just completely bury him at this point. And I'm not going to come out here and make the argument that it's ideal that he didn't play in week one. But Devon Achane was buried on the depth chart last year. The only reason he got a crack early on in the season was due to injuries. So one injury could just, make him fantasy relevant here. And we also saw that Mostert, I believe, was banged up towards the beginning of the fourth quarter. And then Achane was limping a little bit towards the end of the fourth. I haven't gotten the official injury reports on those guys, but it would not be shocking to me if both those dudes had an injury designation heading into week 2. So I would not freak out. If Wright's available, I still think he's worth a pickup here, especially for getting, some injury news on both Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane. Now, pivoting over to the wide receiver position, I want to start off by talking about Brandon Cooks. He's rostered in just under 30% of leagues. You need a pretty solid week one, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown. We saw Jake Ferguson leave with injury in week one. So Brandon Cooks, as long as Ferguson is out, is the clear-cut number 2 target for Dak Prescott. I know he's not in his prime, but someone who I still think is playable at this point in their career, maybe had some wide receiver injuries early on, definitely someone who you could throw in the flex if you are kind of desperate. Then we have Romeo Doubs, who's rostered in 34.1% of leagues. And I think he definitely takes a little bit of a hit with the Jordan Love injury, but he actually led all Packers pass catchers in snaps, routes run, and targets. I know Jaden Reed's going to get a lot of the attention, and rightfully so, because he had a monster game. Christian Watson also got into the end zone, but Doubs clearly has a strong role in this offense, and clearly, he was being heavily targeted by Jordan Love. So I don't think he's going to be super relevant with Love out. Just too many cooks in the kitchen there for the Packers, especially if it's Malik Willis. Basically all those dudes might be unplayable, probably with the exception of Jaden Reed is a flex play, and then Josh Jacobs just based on pure volume. But I definitely think he's someone who's relevant when Jordan Love is healthy. So someone who definitely is still worth an add, especially because it seems like the Jordan Love injury isn't overly serious. Then we're just going to have 3 straight rookie wide receivers here. Starting off with Adonai Mitchell, rostered in 33.5% of leagues. He had solid usage in week 1, 75% route participation. He was second on the team in targets with 5, which isn't a super high number, but I think they only attempted 19 passes, so pretty solid target share. He only ended up catching 1 pass for 2 yards, so it might be why are you talking about this dude? He didn't even do anything. this honestly could have been a monster game. Richardson missed him pretty wide open on 2 deep passes. And so this like 1-for-2 game could have pretty easily been like a 3-catch, 100-yard, 2-touchdown debut, which obviously people would be losing their minds over. So I just think, Mitchell, young, talented player, already earned a role. I know it kind of helps that Josh Downs is injured, but he's going out there, he's getting open, he's giving you the opportunity to make plays. And I always want to be early on these rookies compared to being late, because once they have their big breakout, everyone and their mother is going to be looking to grab them off the waiver wire. Mitchell, people probably aren't going to be super hip to it here heading into week 2. Then we have Jalen Polk, who's rostered in 32.5% of leagues. And the Patriots pretty much played a rotation of 4 wide receivers. The team offense as a whole played 64 snaps. 4 wide receivers played between 35 and 39 of those snaps. Jalen Polk didn't really do a ton, caught 1 pass for 6 yards. The Patriots only threw for 121 yards, so it's going to be tough for any of those dudes to be super fantasy relevant on that type of passing volume. But I do think just at some point in the season, Jalen Polk is going to emerge as the wide receiver 1. I think if that coincides with like Drake May taking over, kind of increasing the ceiling of this offense, that would be fun. But I do think Jalen Polk is an interesting like back half of the season breakout option. And then we have Xavier Legette, who's rostered in 29.1% of leagues. And I'll just start off by saying the Panthers looked absolutely miserable. Bryce Young might just end up being too terrible to support anyone. Like at this point, that definitely is a possibility. I was someone who was like cautiously optimistic on Bryce Young. Didn't think he would ever be a great fantasy quarterback or like an elite NFL quarterback, but I thought he'd at least be able to just distribute the ball to his weapons. I was high on Dave Canales coming in. But man, it was a tough look in week 1. Despite that, though, Xavier Legette looked pretty solid. Only a 59% route participation, but he led the team with 7 targets. So he's earning targets, caught 4 of them for 35 yards. Not an insane stat line, but week 1, earning targets, it's a good sign here out of Xavier Legette. Now, looking at the quarterback position, I think there are definitely some interesting options. Maybe you punted the position, you're looking for someone else. Maybe Kirk Cousins was your guy. Not a great week 1. Maybe you had Jordan Love, who's now going to miss a few weeks. For whatever reason, you could be hitting the waiver wire for the quarterback position. I think one guy who's definitely interesting, Justin Fields. Honestly, a pretty gross game between the Steelers and the Falcons. Fields threw for 156 yards, carried the ball 14 times for 57 yards. Steelers got the win. Fields obviously didn't play great. He didn't completely light it up fantasy-wise. It wasn't even a huge game. But just in terms of like maintaining the starting job, he did not turn the ball over, which is something that has been concerning. And he only took 2 sacks. So he kind of played like that Steeler style of football where you're not going to blow it away. But you're going to do enough to keep your team in the game to get the win. That's kind of, how they've been going over the past 3 years here. There's no guarantee he's the week 2 starter, but just worth looking at, taking a look at how Mike Tomlin's talking this week, because if he can hold on to that starting job, we know he's definitely playable because of his rushing upside. And like, would they have 5 field goals, 18 points or 6 field goals? Like moving forward, they're going to get into the end zone at least a little bit. 14 rush attempts, I think, is pretty encouraging for Justin Fields. Then we have Matthew Stafford, rostered in 35.9% of leagues. He's a nice matchup against the Cardinals next week. You're obviously hoping Puka's healthy. But even if Puka's out, I still think he's probably playable in that matchup. Pepper and Cooper Kupp with targets. Sean McVay's still going to scheme ways to get guys open. So I think he's interesting regardless of, Puka being healthy. But Puka being healthy would make him, a much more confident play. Then we have Baker, rostered in 34% of leagues. He had a monster week 1, 24 of 30 passing, 289 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. He does draw a tougher matchup next week against the Lions, but still not an overly terrifying matchup, but definitely tougher than what he had going up against the Commanders. So if you need someone to fill in, Baker could be your guy. And then the other guy I'd be looking at here, Geno Smith, rostered in 14.8% of leagues. The Seahawks passing game did look a little underwhelming. I was kind of excited to see this unit out there, new coaching staff, a lot of weapons around him. It didn't look great, but Geno still put up 17 fantasy points, used his legs to get into the end zone, which was good to see. Seahawks play the Patriots in week 2, so not a great matchup, but once again, you can't be too picky if you did draft someone like Jordan Love and you just need kind of a short-term replacement. Now, looking at the tight end position, probably maybe the position I was most interested in looking at here, because you had a lot of these tight ends where they looked like the number 1 on the depth chart, but we didn't really know what their usage is going to be. Are they going to be full-time players? What's the ceiling looking like? I think there's one clear guy here who should be like the priority at the tight end position, and that is Isaiah Likely. Rostered in under 10% of leagues, and in Likely's first two NFL seasons, he has been pretty much the only tight end handcuff, where if Mark Andrews went down, Isaiah Likely would give you really solid production. You just don't see that at the tight end position, but Likely was that one dude. So heading into year three, I think a lot of people thought maybe he gets a little bit more playing time, but probably not like a full-time guy. He goes out, just lights it up in week one, 9 receptions, 111 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, 12 targets, almost had that second touchdown, to potentially win them the game if they got the 2-point conversion. He had a 34% target share, 68% route participation, which isn't great, but he's still clearly going to be a focal point of this offense. I think it's clear after week one, especially with the way he played. Like, if it was just the routes, fine, but the fact that he converted, he is going to be probably a, top 3 target on this offense. Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely. Like, I feel like those are going to be the big 3. He's probably a top 12 tight end option moving forward. Now, I'm not going overboard and saying like he's going to be better than Mark Andrews rest of season. I do think Andrews definitely got more attention. Andrews' routes were still solid, but Likely's locked in here. There's no going back. You're not putting the toothpaste, back in the tube here. Likely's going to be fantasy relevant and definitely should be the priority waiver wire ad if you do need a tight end. Then we have Hunter Henry, who's rostered in 11.7% of leagues. Only had 2 receptions for 18 yards, so their production wasn't great. Maybe you don't feel great throwing him into your lineup in week 2, but the usage was solid. He had an 83% route participation. If that sticks, once this offense picks up, potentially Drake May coming in, I think that is definitely encouraging moving forward. Then we have Colby Parkinson, rostered in 1.5% of leagues. He was someone I, kind of liked as a later round tight end sleeper. Not a lot of people, were familiar with him, but he's going to be the tight end 1 here for the Rams with Tyler Higbee out. Was targeted 5 times, caught 4 of them for 47 yards. If you're desperate, I do think he's someone who could be playable as long as Tyler Higbee's out. Then we have Tucker Kraft, rostered in 3.7% of leagues, and it definitely looks like Tucker Kraft is the Packers tight end 1, not Luke Musgrave. Kraft had an 81% route participation compared to 22% for Luke Musgrave. In the short term, he's probably not super appealing with Jordan Love out, but potential tight end 1 here for the Packers moving forward once Love is back is somewhat interesting. Probably could be playable as like a fringe tight end 1 play. Then we have Noah Fant, who's rostered in 6.6% of leagues. Another guy who didn't have a great game, 2 receptions, 11 yards, but he had a 75% route participation. He is acting as the clear tight end 1 here for the Seahawks. And I think it'll be interesting to see what the production looks like, with a bigger passing game here out of the Seahawks. Because if you remember, when he was with the Broncos, his last 2 years there, he was a back-end fantasy tight end 1. So that upside is definitely there for Noah Fant, where he is someone who you could be, somewhat relying on week to week. And then just an honorable mention to Greg Dulcich, rostered in 1.3% of leagues, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 12 yards, 71% route participation, which isn't perfect, but he is operating early on as the clear tight end 1. This team needs weapons. He could be that dude. And then just looking at some defenses to stream here, we have the Chargers rostered in 10.5% of leagues. They're going up against the Panthers. Like I talked about earlier, the Panthers offense looked completely terrible. Chargers defense looked pretty solid against the Raiders. I think they are definitely a priority pickup. We have the Broncos rostered in 1.5% of leagues. They're going up against the Steelers. Steelers offense did not look great. I think they're a decent option. Jaguars rostered in 23.3% of leagues. Even though they didn't have a great fantasy day, they did somewhat limit this Dolphins offense, which is at least a little bit interesting, especially when you compare that to how badly the Browns offense looked. We then have the Giants and Commanders just straight up playing each other. So Giants rostered in 3.8% of leagues going up against the Commanders. Rookie quarterback, I think Jayden Daniels played fine fantasy-wise. He's going to be solid, but in terms of really picking apart and destroying fantasy defenses, I don't know if we're there yet. And then same thing with the Commanders. Don't think they have a great defense, but if you're super desperate, the Giants offense looked pretty terrible. Could be a matchup you're looking to exploit there. So that's going to wrap it up for some of my top waiver wire targets at every single position. If you have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.